Everybody. We're just going to wait maybe in 1 more minute for everyone to sign on. I'm sorry that we're a couple minutes late. We're just trying to figure out a few things with PowerPoint. Okay, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, all of you. This presentation is called Caring for Our Mental Health. It's one of the 1-hour sessions that we've organized as part of the Welcome Week, or 2 weeks. So my name's Sarah Pituello, and I'm one of the counselors at Acadia's Counseling Center. So here, so for the beginning, welcome. Welcome to Mi'kma'ki. This is unceded Mi'kmaq territory. Welcome to Acadia. Welcome to this presentation. I am delighted to be here with all of you. And although, I wish I could see all of you and I wish we were doing this in person, I also just recognize, as with everything lately, that there's probably good opportunities that come with presenting in this way too. So I look forward to opportunities to connect in the future, and also I'm grateful that you're all here today. So I thought I would do a little introduction of myself. I'll take a few moments, and then the outline of the session is I'm just going to talk a little bit about mental health in context. We're going to talk a little bit about just the times we're in, coming to university, and also this pandemic and everything that's also been happening in terms of social justice. We're going to talk a little bit about caring for ourselves. I'd love to hear, you guys have been doing this for the last few months, so I want to sort of take a moment to brainstorm together some of the things that we've been doing to look after ourselves already. And then I want to share a little bit with you around counseling in general and around Acadia's Counseling Center, resources on campus, different resources that are available. And then also, then there'll be lots and plenty of time for you to ask any questions that you might have. So I'd be, I'm happy to discuss any of those things with you. We're going to do it through the chat box. You'll be able to type in questions in the chat box and I'll be able to respond. Okay, so to introduce myself a little bit, I grew up in Ontario. I moved here, and I've lived here since 2009, and I moved here to do the counseling program at Acadia after doing some counseling work at Queen's University, and also to work on an organic farm here with my partner. So I've been counseling at the Counseling Center for about 3 years. I've been running groups there as well. So I do individual, one-on-one counseling, and I run mindfulness groups, and I've done some sustainability and wellness groups and yoga groups sort of over the last few years. In other parts of my life, I moved here to farm and worked as an organic grower for a number of years and was a vendor at the farmers market, and I'm sort of been part of that community here in Wolfville. And so, I also have taught in community development and taught sort of sustainable food systems and worked and written in that sort of area as well. So that's a little bit about me. I have a family, I have 2 kids. I live just outside of Grand Pré on a farm that we own here now. And we've had a huge garden this year. And so, some of you who are tuning in are new. Some of you are coming back for another year. Some of you are in quarantine for the next 2 weeks. Some of you are living in town and not in quarantine. So we're a really diverse group, and I'm hoping that there's a lot of richness that comes out of all of this because of it. Okay, so for the first slide, I just wanted to take a moment to put this here, because when I think about how we're going to care for our mental health during these next 2 weeks and during the next year and forever really, it's always really helpful for me to think about it in a larger context. So how do we place mental health and see our health and our wellness in a multidimensional and interrelated kind of way? And so I put this image here. This is one way of thinking about it. There's many ways of thinking about it. But looking at this offers 8 dimensions of wellness, but thinking about our wellness as being multidimensional, and that all of the different factors influence all the others. And so if we're struggling with one of them, I mean, besides sort of addressing it directly, remembering that we can be well in many ways, even if we're not in one way. So that our wellness, different aspects of it can impact the others. So it's important for me to start with like a really big picture. Yeah, and so, I mean, university, even coming to university, like even in the most ordinary and predictable of times, is always an important time of transition and initiation. And so, we're leaving things that are really familiar. We're leaving maybe our homes, maybe our communities, and even if we're not leaving those, we might be leaving sort of familiar environments and routines. So we're really moving into like a really new phase of our life. And I always have, in like all good stories, you have the sense of the person who's like got their backpack and the like backward gaze looking as they're kind of like leaving, the sense of leaving things that are familiar in order to embark on something new. And so I just, even in the most simple of times, this is like a really big transition. And I think that in that, there's all kinds of good opportunities for discovery and for learning and for growth. And in all good stories, the protagonist meets all kind of challenges, and they're like inner challenges and they're outer challenges, and that it's like the way that they change and respond and learn in those contexts. So I wrote, there's all kinds of opportunities for discovering and for learning and growing into this sort of new phase of your life. And that the learning is also about engaging with those challenges, whether they're sort of personal, internal challenges or relational challenges, or just sort of meeting the political and social challenges that are happening at that time. And what I didn't write here, that I have in my own notes, is also just like the engagement in deeper learning of, whatever it is you're coming to study. So there's also this like broadening of your knowledge base, and maybe some of it has more of like a, learning specific material. Some of it's more of like developing a craft and in being in sort of a concentrated space to learn. So always university is a time of transition in that way. And then, as if that isn't enough, right now there's like, we're in this time that's totally unprecedented in many ways. And so, many of us were in quarantine since, in March, there was like self-isolation, and then sort of all of these different ways in which we're engaging in our communities. And additionally, there's been all the sort of protests and uprising and work around trying to understand and end systemic racism that has looked different for all of us. So there's just been a huge time of upheaval in terms of like our own systems and schedules and like the broader systems that we're a part of. And so, our expectations and our ability to like project into the future and that be like just an obvious and more simple thing is kind of been lost. And I think it's been really important to acknowledge the losses that we've had in terms of how we expected things to be. And perhaps, these 2 weeks aren't exactly how you imagined your university sort of beginning. And not only you, but, and then at this level of the university, like all of us are trying out these new formats at the same time. So it's like new for everybody. I think in some ways this time is really challenging our sense of individualism. So, we all have different conditions that we're working with in terms of our health, in terms of our risk tolerance, in terms of like the family situations in which we're embedded. So I think in some ways that this time is really asking us to be sort of adaptable and open and like trying to keep our deep values in mind as we move forward. But I would say in this context, like it's also would be very predictable to like expect some mental health challenges to show up sort of as we're working our way through it. So I often think about, you know, on like many levels. So internally, in terms of how I deal with myself, in terms of how I deal with my family, in terms and friends, how I deal with the community, what these larger systems look like. And I often ask myself, you know, how can we cultivate a culture of care? You know, how do we cultivate it for ourselves? How do we cultivate it for each other? How do we cultivate it in like larger systems? And so what I wanted to kind of go through is like, what insights and resources do you already have? I mean, you've been here for a number of days, you've been probably doing this for months. So I just, in a moment, are going to take a moment, and I'd love for you to just let me know a little bit about the ways in which you've found it helpful to look after yourself. And then I want to talk a little bit about counseling and the supports that are available on campus. And then just a question for all of us is, you know, how do we keep orienting ourselves towards learning and growth in times when things feel kind of stuck and like we're not really sure how they're going to go. So what I wanted to do is just take a moment. And so I wrote, in terms of gathering some of the collective wisdom that we already had. So like, what are you already doing to support your mental health and well-being? How are we caring for ourselves? How are we caring for others at this time? So I think we're going to turn the PowerPoint off for a moment. And if you would be willing to sort of add into the chat box, then we can sort of answer some of those questions or just some of your thoughts that you already have about things that you're doing. I've been making sure I get outside at least once a day. Oh, hold on. There we go. And checking in with friends on a regular basis. That's perfect. Yeah, I think one of the opportunities too is that we are able to connect also more with people, both like people at home and people that, you know, we've been in relationship with for a long time, as well as sort of connecting with other people who are here. And that the circle of support is staying much more consistent as we've like moved situations than it might have otherwise. Perfect. And outside, this is like the glory days here. This is like one of the nicest time of year. And I'm glad that there's at least some opportunities to get out throughout the day. Yes, I started baking was one, which is great. Totally. I think that like the food thing has become really huge. And ways of like offering a lot of nourishment and care and being able to like enjoy that ourselves and share it with other people. Thank you. I'm thinking about all the Facebook posts with all the sourdough bread. Meditations, wonderful, awesome. Some of these practices, maybe they're new to you, or maybe you've never done it before, but figure like, well, this might be like the perfect time. One of the things I will talk a little bit about is the groups that we offer through the Counseling Center, and one of them is a meditation group, and I'm the one who's been teaching that for about 3 or 4 years now. And so yeah, I think that would be lovely. Oh, here we go. My family and I fostered a dog, and I think we'll be adopting him. So good. Going for walks with friends to stay active and social. Reading to escape the world and enter a new one for a little while. It's like so good. I've been noticing lately if I can fall deeply enough into either a movie or a book that I come out feeling like much more refreshed. Baking with chocolate specifically. Trying to get a media break every once in a while and getting away from the constant news. I think I'll talk a little bit about this too, but being able to set boundaries around like just how much we can tolerate is really important. A consistent routine is really helpful. Journaling. The routine piece is kind of can hold so much together, and I'll come back to journaling, but keeping the general sort of routines and structures can make things much more manageable. Journaling is wonderful. Coloring, any of those sort of creative and artistic outputs where there's opportunities to express how things are going for us and how we're feeling is perfect. Oh, you guys are wonderful. So great. Okay. So I might switch gears again and to go back to my PowerPoint, but I feel like you kind of hit most of the things that I was going to add as well. Okay. Okay, so offerings of care. One was staying connected. So as we said, just to friends, to people, so that we're not sort of feeling like we're on our own. And to family, knowing your boundaries and limits, I think is really important. So like knowing when to take breaks, knowing when to unplug, taking opportunities just to say no and take and rest, or not to engage in something that doesn't feel like a great thing for you. Care for your body. And so, thinking about the ways in which those different kinds of wellnesses are sort of integrated, that getting good as much as possible, that sleep and fresh air, movement, good food, some nourishment, whatever that looks like for you. Some breathing, the meditation piece, sort of things that are calming. Finding opportunities for creativity and pleasure, which you mentioned. I added being gentle with the parts of yourself that show up. So I was thinking of, what's that movie? The movie where Inside Out, where they've got all like the different parts. And I think in a lot of these situations, there's just so many different parts of us that show up in these new situations, and just like being, as gentle as you can when they start to show up. I mean, like, oh yeah, okay, like it's expected that all sorts of different parts of ourselves might show up in times like these. I wrote recognize opportunities. So when that feels like a good thing, recognizing the ways in which some of these situations are creating opportunities that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Yeah, and I think like that's not to say that, not to discount that things can be difficult or when they're difficult, but just seeing like, oh, that's kind of a relief. I was thinking about sometimes the ways in which doing Zoom meetings, I'm so grateful to be plunked in a group and not have to do all like the negotiating of finding my own group. That's one thing that I've noticed in some workshops, that I was like, oh, this is great, nice and quick. I'm happy to be with who I end up with. I wrote favors to your future self. This is something that I think about often, is like thinking about things you could do now as a favor to yourself in 2 weeks from now. So what are things I could do for them? And sometimes it's just a really good way to orient myself toward, putting things into place or building good foundations that are a favor to myself in 2 weeks from now, or a month from now, or a year from now. I thought about the ways in which we listen to each other and remind others of these things as well. There's a lot of good connecting, I think, that can happen during these times, and especially when we're all kind of in similar and maybe very different situations. But, when we feel like we've been receiving and well taken care of, there's lots of capacity to also offer that to other people. And then when it comes to the boundaries, like also recognizing when we don't have that in us. And then reaching out for support. So like when you've kind of exhausted your own list of things, also reaching out for support. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about counseling before we get into sort of the details of the counseling center and how it works. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how I think about counseling and the different roles, just before we even talk about sort of the basics of how it works at Acadia. So counseling this was one of millions of definitions, but a therapeutic and relational process that's in service of change and healing. So it's really founded on a sturdy relationship, and the relationship itself is therapeutic in nature. And, the role is, the work is to have a process that we can work through with the in service of finding ways of changing and healing for the client. So as the counselor, my role is to create that container for change. And I do that through care in our relationship, to like attunement and like paying attention, to offering education and sort of like maybe there's things that, you know, for me, there's always been so many things that I just didn't understand until someone sort of explained to me how things work. And then my role is also to offer a process. And so here's the process that we can work through together in service of that change. And the client's role is to engage in the relationship as much as you're able, and the process and the work that shows up both sort of inside the session and in between sessions. And so by the work, I mean just like being willing to try to show up and work with sort of whatever is coming up in our work together. I think it's really important to remember that this is like ongoing and evolving work. So there might be like different phases. You might go to counseling once and then 2 years later be like, oh, now I need to go back and do this piece. Maybe there's a concentrated chunk at the beginning and then there's a break. Maybe it's ongoing over a specific period of time. But just to remember that it's not like you do it and then it's fixed and then it's over. That it's just like it's like an evolving process that happens like over time. So there also it doesn't need to be a sense of like getting it all right really quickly. I wrote that acceptance and curiosity are really important. And that's kind of what we're always working with. It's like when I just mentioned, you know, different parts showing up, it's like, oh, okay, so the acceptance looks like I see you, and curiosity is like, what's up? Like, why are you here? What's needed? What's triggering this at the moment? And if you can sort of maintain a sense of curiosity, then there's lots of good possibility for change. And I also wrote finding the right place for responsibility so we can grow. And by that, what I mean is there's kind of like a sweet spot for how we take responsibility for our own growth. And I think that comes from not taking too much responsibility for the situation, like recognizing the complexity of issues that bring us into a particular moment, but also not taking so little responsibility that we just kind of blame everybody else and expect them to fix it for us. So it's kind of like accepting that it's not really our fault that all of these things are happening or showing up, but also that nobody else can do our work for us. Like we still, you know, like the character at the beginning, right, with the backpack that's like ready to go. Like we all have our own work to do, and it's kind of our own thing that we can do with lots of support. But if we put it off to somebody else, we don't really find the sweet spot where we're able to kind of do that work. Okay, so Acadia's Counseling Center, I put the website up at the top. So at the Counseling Center, we use what's called a stepped care. We call it 2.0 because it's been evolving over time, but model. So it's a strengths-based model. So it's assuming that you are arriving at counseling with lots of good experience and strengths already that are going to be able to sort of help you work through things. And the stepped care means that we offer various levels of support depending on what's needed. So currently almost all of the counseling is virtual. So we're either doing it over phone or we're using an online platform called Doxy, which is like a video conferencing platform. If you want to make an appointment, you can contact via email. So there's the email address. We offer a 30-minute intake appointment within, almost always within 24 hours. So we're aiming to get people in really quickly within the contact. And then from there, we have the half-hour session in order to sort of build a plan. So we may decide that we're going to proceed, you know, that we'll book another counseling session to do some individual counseling together. We may refer you to group counseling, and I'll go through that in a moment. There's many e-mental health tools and then other resources on campus or in the community. So we'll sort of look at all of those pieces, look at what's happening for you, and we'll build a plan together. There are 5 of us working at the counseling center this fall. Usually there's 7, we'll have 2 interns, but we don't have interns this fall, but we will again in the winter because we're also a teaching space. So we're places where counseling interns can come do their practicums. And what's really important is that with counseling that you find a good fit. And so if you if you come to a session and you find that you don't connect well with the counselor, that you see, don't give up. You're welcome to try again. You can even tell them, I'm not sure if it's a good fit, and we are also more than happy to help find sort of the right person for you. So you can look on the website, there's a list of all of our bios, so you can like check that out and see if you can get a feeling for who might be a good fit. But we're also really happy to help you with that. So all of the counseling sessions and the fact that you're even there is confidential. There are limits to confidentiality, which include, if we were concerned that you were going to hurt yourself or someone else, or if there was a youth in a dangerous situation. But that's kind of it. And other than that, everything is sort of completely confidential. In terms of fees, counseling is free. And we just ask that if something comes up and you have to cancel, that you just give us as much notice as possible. Or also if you saw someone 3 weeks ago and you were like pretty sure you'd need another session, but you get there and you're feeling great, then it's also totally fine to cancel, because if we think about sort of the cultivating community of care, there's likely other people who could use the session. So you're so welcome to take as many sessions as you need, but if you feel like you don't need it and you're doing fine, then you might open it up to give a chance to somebody else to have a session. So I'm going to go through this quickly, but you can find out more on our website, but there are plenty of e-mental health tools. So basically, these are the use of internet or other communication technologies to offer mental health information and care. They're like effective and complementary to the face-to-face counseling. They are of no cost and you can access them anytime. These are sort of the 24/7 counseling platforms that you can use. It's pretty empowering in that you can sort of initiate your own steps toward change when you're feeling like you're needing something. And then I just gave a list of like, there's lots of different kinds. But what I wanted to draw your attention to were there's something on our website called Healthy Minds. I wish I had the logo here for it, but Healthy Minds will have a list of all of the different platforms. So this is just 2 of them. There's many, but so Good to Talk is one, and these are registered therapists in Toronto and Montreal for ages 17 to 25. There's not yet texting available in Nova Scotia, but they're available 24/7. So you can call this number anytime and find therapists who are available to you. The other one is TAO. And so this is like an online and interactive mental health library. So it's free for all students, it's 100% confidential. And there's basically like 9 different pathways for like online sort of mental health. Yeah, there's like libraries, and there's interactive modules, and it's also available 24 hours a day, which is important because the counseling center is only open. We're open from 8:30 to 4, 5 days a week, so we don't function sort of in those sort of spans of time. So these are also other things that are available to you. So through the counseling center, we run groups. So and this is just a list of some of the ones that we've done over the last few years. And they're led by counselors, sometimes as well, like they're say co-facilitated with someone else from the community who maybe can offer expertise. So the ones we've had mindfulness-based practice groups, so mostly meditation and also some walking meditation and movement. And those are the ones that I've been offering that are offered twice a semester usually. And they'll be starting up online in the next week or 2. We've had a reclaim kickboxing group. There's been yoga groups. We ran a group last year called From the Ground Up that was around sustainability and wellness. There's been songwriting groups. There's been some that have been more practical, like resume writing or working on sleep habits. Those are the ones that come to mind first of all. But all of those will be advertised on the Counseling Center's Facebook page. And then I just wanted to make a list for you of other campus resources. So if you go to the website, on our website, you can find all of the sort of peer and professional resources that are available on campus. So I made a quick list, but there's more. But so for peer support, there's the Acadia Mental Health Initiative. So these are run by students. Acadia's Women's Center, and the Acadia Pride Initiative. So those are all student run. And all of the sort of links to them are available on the webpage. And then in terms of campus advisors and support, there's the Accessible Learning Center. And I just gave you sort of the main names of the people who are managing it or hold that role. There's the Black Student Employment and Cultural Navigator. The chaplain, Dr. Marjorie Lewis, is here, and she's new over the last year or so. The Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Officer is Polly Leonard. There's an Indigenous Affairs Coordinator, who's Sabrina Whitman, Student Advisor, Adam Detienne, and then the Wong International Student Center, Carissa Campbell is the coordinator. So that's kind of a list of campus advisors and support. There's a resource on sexuality and relationships I gave the link to also on our website with things around healthy relationships, consent, sexual assault, support for the LGBTQ plus community. Yeah, and so you're welcome to you can explore that a little bit and take a look. The thing that I haven't offered with these resources are things like there's a writing center at Acadia that's available for support with writing essays or thesis writing. There are tutoring, through many of the different faculties. Those are kind of the main ones. And through the counseling center, we also do some sort of like if you're looking at sort of career counseling in terms of like what careers am I best suited to? I'm not sure I'm in the right, the right program. I mean, those questions inevitably come up. My undergrad was in physics, and yet I find myself here now talking as a therapist. And so there's also both the strong inventory and the Myers-Briggs that we do through the counseling center that we're also able to offer. And I think that's pretty much, yeah, that's kind of the end of my presentation. And so now I would love to hear if you have any questions, if there's anything I can help with. I'm more than happy to answer your questions when you're ready. I'm just going to open the little chat box. Oh, thank you. So the question was, when you say Acadia Pride, do you mean pride towards Acadia or pride as in LGBTQ plus pride? I mean LGBTQ plus pride. So the Acadia Pride is a group of students that runs all kinds of events and things through a year to support the LGBTQ plus community. Yeah, so please. Oh, here we go. Sorry, I realize the questions are like backing up. Okay, so are the online platforms free? Yes, all of the online platforms are free. There's a few others that I didn't mention. One is called 7 Cups, and it allows you to connect with both professionals and peers on a 24/7 sort of basis. And yeah, they're all free. Is there a way to connect with other students who are feeling the same things? Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the answer is yes. I think one way of doing that is there's a few thoughts, but one is that the groups that are being offered on campus, that those are kind of good ways to connect with students who might be having sort of similar issues. I mean, I think that's sort of one way that I've seen students do it. I think that there's plenty of opportunity in the residences as well, and times and abilities to sort of check in with others. I mean, it would be interesting to think about offering like a group, like a support group for first years or people who are new to Acadia in order to just sort of talk about what that transition is like and offer some support to each other. That's like certainly a great idea that I don't think that we've really done. in some ways, but I think the groups that we've run, like, or even the sustainability and wellness group, which offered, opportunity for people to come together who are experiencing grief and loss and anxiety around climate issues and sustainability issues. There was an opportunity to come together in that way. And so, yeah, I think that if you have ideas of sort of groups or ways that would be, we could support connecting students who are experiencing the same things, like, please, you can email us and let us know. And we would happily start to try to pull some of those pieces together. I hope that helps. If you want to ask another question, if I answer your question and I didn't answer it, or there's something else you had in mind, please just write another question in the box. Is there a way to request a counselor? Absolutely. So when you either call the counseling center, or I think the call machine right now refers you to email. So when you send an email, you can just ask to be put with a specific person. That's no problem at all. And you will get an appointment with them. If you don't ask for somebody, you'll likely be put with the person who has the first available appointment. So that's sort of how that works in general. Yeah. There's also a men's helpline for Nova Scotia if you call 211, since Acadia doesn't have anything specific for men. That's a good, I'm thinking about on the website, there is something for men specifically, but it might be under, but it might be a community resource. Like, you might be pointing out the one that is on there already, but if you haven't looked, it might be worth taking a look. How do you join the Pride? Please let me know if you want me to speak to that more specifically. How do you run the Pride group? How do you join the Pride group? I would just email them. And so I'm sure there's a Facebook page, and from our website, you can find the link to their either website or like their page on the website, or there's a Facebook group, and I think you can find out how to engage with them from there. They'll likely be running a lot of their own online programming, and so you can just sort of check in and see what's happening there. Will there be a virtual yoga group? If there is interest, there can definitely be a virtual yoga group. Yeah, we haven't fully ironed out all of the groups that are going to be available, but if that's something that might be of interest, please let the counseling center know. So you can just send an email. Yeah, so you can just send an email to the counseling center or to me. I'll give you my email at the very end, and just let me know if you're interested, because maybe that would be like a wonderful thing for us to do together. Thank you for running the session. I've been anxious in Acadia this year, but there have been so many people to reach out to and showing so much support. I am so glad. And I think this is like definitely, I'm so glad you're feeling that way. And I also am, yeah, I'm so wishing in some ways I could see all of you and we could be having this conversation in person, but we are all here. And yeah, please do reach out if you need anything at all. All of us are back at the counseling center and working. So we're open and available and ready anytime. Okay. Please keep, yeah, and please do keep if you have more questions or haven't quite responded, please keep asking. Do you have any advice for staying mentally healthy while attending Acadia virtually from a stressful home environment? Yeah. It's a really good question. And I know that we are all at it, in some ways in other years, there's a more common and shared experience amongst the people who are, that everyone who's sort of there are all in very similar situations, and that's going to be something that's quite different this year. Some will be on campus, some won't be on campus, some will be doing it from home, and in other, and maybe in more stressful home environments. So a few things that I might suggest is thinking about, one is like how to set good boundaries for yourself around what you need in order to do some of your schoolwork, if that's possible, and in order to kind of feel like you have space where you can, it's your own space and you can work from there and be focused on school in the way you need to. I know that's like way easier said than done. When everyone went home last March and we were counseling, I was counseling with people who would like go out for walks. They would go out for a walk with their phone, and we would talk for the hour while they were out moving around. I know some people would go and like, if it was like the weather wasn't so good, there's a lot of car counseling going on, people sort of staying sitting in the cars and having as a way of finding some privacy. I've used some of the sort of online platforms and the chat boxes at moments where back and forth with someone if it wasn't possible for them to speak in a way that felt okay given those situations. So I think so some of those are just ways to say, like, you can still reach out for support if needed, and maybe in the particulars we could help figure out what it is that you need to be able to sort of navigate that situation. And I think also just all of the usual things for looking after yourself will support all of that extra work that you're going to have to do in that situation. But if you need to, if it would be helpful, I'm sure that we could find ways of working together to offer that kind of support as you're kind of navigating those pieces together. I hope that answers your question. If you would like me to say more, just write it again in the question box. That would be great. I've never done counseling before, but would like to. What is the experience like? That's such a good question. What's it like? I always joke when people come in for first sessions that it's like really terrible. It's like, it has a sense of like warmth and care, and it has a particular focus to it that's different from our ordinary friendships. So, I mean, if it helps, maybe what I could say is the way that, say, like not an intake, but a regular session might work is if you came and maybe we'd met once and we'd done an intake together, and then you decided, oh, actually, this feels really good, and I would really like to sit for an hour together and talk. There's this thing that I usually think about counseling, like people come when they're stuck, like I'm stuck, I can't figure this out by myself, and I need a little bit of support to help figure it out. And so you might come in, try to get comfortable. We'll be doing it online now. So there's like a few moments of like getting ourselves ready and feeling kind of comfortable and supported and having the things that we need. And then there's a part of the session that includes sharing a little bit in terms of like, well, here's what's happening and here's some of the context for it and the larger story. And here's kind of like what I'm hoping the outcome might be. Like, this is how I would like the change to be, or I don't even know what it might look like because it's always been like this, and it's sort of seeing the places where you're getting a little bit stuck in your own life and none of the things that you already know are helpful in like moving that forward. I often think about counseling more like removing obstacles so that things can flow ahead forward on their own than adding a lot in. Does that make sense? So for me, there's always a sense about freeing things up as opposed to that there's something that's missing that we need to like add back in. And then at some point in the session, so that might take 20 minutes, that might take 5 minutes, that might take 3 sessions. It really depends. And but there's a point at which we start to identify what kind of process we might use to work through it, and where are the places where we're getting a little bit stuck, where we need to do some work. So sometimes there's like an educational component where I'll try to like explain a way of thinking about what's happening that will allow you to like see it slightly differently. Like maybe one way of thinking about counseling is that you bring something in that looks a particular way, and we try to find a way for you to have a different kind of relationship with it. We're trying to like transform how we're stuck into something else. And so some of that, for me, a lot of that work so all of us who work at the counseling center have different styles, we have different personalities, we have different ways that we go about these things or we see them. And so for myself, a lot of the work I do is really body-centered. So it goes from like, and so what I mean by body-centered is like starting to notice what's happening for you in real time as you talk about those things. So we might like do a little bit of mindfulness work. We might instead just be like interested in what's happening for you as you talk about it. So in that way, it's not like the thing is outside of our session. We're working with like exactly what's actually showing up in the session together. And so in some way, the relationship between us and the ability for us to share about what's going on and how attuned we are to what's happening for, or I am to what's happening to you, and my ability to ask good questions, you know, that's like the relational piece is really big. It's like a really important part. And then there's kind of like a process where we experiment and explore together and sort of see what happens. And with the hopes of freeing some things up a little bit, so that when you leave the session, you are able to move through, you know, you move into your life and you see these moments where those things happen and you're able to respond differently. Like I think in some ways we're looking for like a little less reactivity and patterns and a little bit more of ability to choose how you want to respond to the situation. Maybe that's like another way of thinking about it. Yeah, and there's always an education, there's some form of educational piece. There's some point of just us getting on the same page in terms of how I see things and how you see things, and so that we can kind of understand each other. Yeah, and then we kind of see what happens between the sessions, and then there's like time before we meet again, and you're like, there's lots of experiments and things to try and things to maybe read or things to practice or little journaling pieces to try to do to learn a little bit more about yourself, and those situations in particular. I mean, we kind of design that together in this session. And then often there's a time to come back and check in about it. And sometimes the check-in looks like, wow, I'm doing really much better. And it's like, great, perfect. You know, that's perfect. That's it. And we can like leave it there for now. And then maybe another time something else comes up. Or maybe there's like a refinement of like, oh, I actually realized all of these other things, and then we start working there too. So everything is really individualized. It really depends on just what's needed. Yeah, that was a long answer. I hope that kind of helped though. Is there any more questions? I'm happy to, we still have a few more minutes if there's anything else that maybe I didn't, that you're curious about, or yeah, or things I mentioned but you'd like to hear more about. Maybe the other thing to say about the online sort of e-counseling platforms is that you can access them without coming to the counseling center. So you can access all of those things anytime on your own as well. If you kind of look through the counseling center's webpage, you can find them and you can always access those things yeah, anytime. They're not connected to our work at the counseling center necessarily. Awesome. So I'll just wait another minute in case something pops into anyone's, any more questions. Also, maybe I can put it here. I'm going to type my email address. Did that show up? Yeah. Okay, so if you have more questions, oh, okay, hold on, there's another question, hold on. But if you have any questions, or if you need anything, well, not need anything, if you have any questions specifically about the presentation today or about you know, anything related to counseling, please just send me an email and let me know, and I'm happy to help. Okay, hold on, I'm going to go back up. Okay, so thank you for providing all this information. First-time counseling may seem very stressful at first, but it's always very calming and nice once you've adjusted to the feeling of sitting and talking with someone. Really true. So I think it's really also important to say that there is always a part of us that's really resistant to changing. So even when I've had counseling sessions, part of me is doing everything it can to come up with a reason not to go right up until the last minute. There's like always a part that's like trying to just get out of it because it feels really vulnerable. And part of me just doesn't want to go there and would rather just kind of make it, not. So it's good to know ahead of time that that you might be wanting to bail before the first session, and that's okay. You might feel nervous. You might that would be that's super predictable. I would be really surprised if you bounded in super excited, because there's a part of you that will want to resist it a little bit, and that's really healthy and really, really good. And I think often that's eased within the first little time of actually getting to know one and understanding that it's like a relational process that's really relaxed and caring. It's not, you never have to, you get to choose and lay the land of what the work looks like, that, there's no, yeah. So I appreciate you bringing up that it may seem stressful at first, and it probably, it feels a little tricky, but it gets easier for sure within the first session. And I find now I don't feel even seeing someone new, I feel pretty excited because I have a sense of the process. I have a sense of what's possible, and I have a sense of okay, here's what I'm coming with, here's what I'm looking for. And it gets so much easier. Thanks for taking the time. You're so welcome. This has been such a pleasure. I'm really happy to have had the opportunity. What's your favorite thing to do outdoors in Wolfville? Oh man, there's a lot of really beautiful hiking, running, walking trails everywhere. And if you can get sort of out down to the bottom of the hill and out on the dikes, there's just so much space to move around and just be outside. It's really pretty without having to go very far at all. And maybe some of you are living on the top of the hill, and so it's kind of, you got to go down to the bottom for a while, but then make your way back up again. I also lived at the top of the hill for a while and only really went up and down once a day. But it's just really a beautiful spot to be outside. There's lots of really good U-picks and farms around too, so you can go. This is the glory time of year for growing food, so there's everything is available. So there's just down the road from Acadia, there's all sorts of farm markets and places where you can get all kinds of beautiful produce that's grown just right around here, and the apples are just coming out now. Anyway, it's a really nice time to be here. Awesome. Okay, well, please go ahead if there's anything else. Otherwise, we might just finish up for today. But you do have my email, so please feel free to write and ask any questions, and I'm happy to try to direct you or support you in the way that best I can. And I guess I would also add, if you have ideas for groups, please write and let me know, and I'll bring them to the counseling center, and we'll see if we can't find ways of doing that. I think given that we're not in person as much this year, that's a really exciting opportunity to think about groups a little bit differently. I'm going to definitely spend some time doing that today and tomorrow before we meet as a group again, because maybe there's ways that we could offer some of those things a little bit better, or that are more suited anyway to this period of time. Awesome. Okay, well, maybe I'll leave it at that then for today. Thank you so much all for coming. I'm really grateful for you taking the time out of your day and using up some of your screen time endurance to be here and spend time with me. Yeah, and I look forward to connecting with you in different ways soon. Awesome. Thank you so much.